Okay, welcome to Podnutz Daily for October 7th, 2008, episode number 93. I was going to talk about this first, but I'll save it for later. Let me just move it down the list here. I had a power adapter on an eMachines laptop. Like I said before, you don't see too many eMachines laptops. It wasn't a power adapter, it was a power jack. Went in, and the power jack was just completely destroyed on this eMachines computer. I went in and did a repair on the power jack, got the power jack fixed. I talked about that in a previous episode on what I did on that. And then, started up the computer. Now, this computer also had a power adapter that was also bad. So the customer brought in two power adapters. One he just bought at Best Buy to replace the old one, which was broken. So I took a look at the old one, and I tried to get a voltage reading on it after I plugged it in, and the actual brick itself started beeping. There was some kind of mechanism in there, I guess, to detect a short, so it started beeping. So I used the one that he bought at Best Buy. It was brand new. Started using the machine, tested it out for like 2 or 3 minutes just to make sure it was getting power. Everything was fine. So I called him up and said, and everything was working. I called him up, said, "Here, your computer's done." He picked it up, took it home, called up and said, "The same thing is happening." So I'm thinking to myself, I fixed the power jack. How can the same thing be happening with the jack fixed? So I'm like, maybe there's a loose connection in the power jack or something. I'm like, all right, just bring it back in. I'll check it out. He brought it in. I plugged in the power in. The battery was getting a charge. The computer booted right up. I'm like, what is wrong with this computer? Now, this particular model also had, when I put the heatsink back on the processor, when I was putting it back together, I did not seat it properly. So I would actually turn the computer on, and it would go off in like 3 seconds just from an instant overheat. I found that out quickly, reseated the heatsink, and everything was fine, is what I thought. This was before I gave it back to him. So I'm like, so when he's bringing it back to me now, I'm like, maybe it is a bad processor. Maybe I fried it when I put the heatsink on wrong. Maybe it's a heat issue. I didn't know what the problem was. So I attempted to, what did I do? I brought it in, I started it up, and sure enough, after you run it for like 5 minutes or so, the thing would turn off. I wasn't letting it run for that long. I was testing it for only 3 or 4 minutes. So he was right. It was powering off, but I just had this feeling that it was not the processor. And what did I do? I started taking it apart. I was going to test the processor. And then it hit me. As I'm doing this, it hit me. The power brick that came with his original computer was big. The power adapter he bought at Best Buy was small. The power adapter he bought at Best Buy only put out like 3 amps, and his brick put out like 6 amps, I think, 5.9 or 5 point something. And what's going to happen if you're not providing the computer with enough power? It's going to turn off. So I was guessing that it was the power brick that was bad, or not the power brick. It was the power adapter that he was using was just not powerful enough. And when the computer actually had to do something that draws a lot of power, like turn on the second fan because it had 2 fans in it, it was turning the computer off. So what I did was I took a power brick that I had that was working, that was a high wattage, which also means high current power adapter. You got to make sure these power adapters are the same voltage. You cannot change the voltage. It was 19 volts, and that's how much the Best Buy adapter put out, and that's how much this particular power adapter that came with the thing put out. So you got to keep the voltage the same. You can't fluctuate the voltage. You can technically put a power adapter with a lower amperage or lower wattage onto this system, and you'll probably get the symptoms that's happening with this thing. It will turn off if it's not enough amps being produced. So I took a look at his power brick, the one that was beeping, the one he brought in that was broken. And I said, I wonder why this thing's beeping. There must be a short somewhere. So I snipped off the tip of the power adapter and powered it on. The thing was still beeping. So I went a little farther down the line and snipped off a piece of wire, maybe like a 6-inch piece of wire from the end. And it appears that the short was actually in that part of the wire, because after I did that and I powered it on, by the way, do not snip the wire while the power adapter's plugged in. Make sure it's unplugged. I snipped the wire, then I plugged the power adapter in. The beeping stopped. I took a voltage reading at the end of where the wire I cut, and I was getting the 19 volts. So I knew that it was shorting out. I knew the short was somewhere in that 6-inch span of wire. And I also found out it wasn't in the tip. So luckily, I have the tip of the power adapter now, and I took out the 6-inch bad section, and I have the rest of it, which is good. So I just soldered the tip onto the end of the good section, of course, you put your heat shrink tubing on there first, so you make a good seal. Electrical tape's not going to cut it on this thing, guys. It's going to unravel. So make sure you get some heat shrink tubing and use that. Sealed that all up, made it look like new, and I hooked that up to the computer, and it worked. So it was definitely, the power supply was not putting out enough voltage. It was not an overheat problem, which I thought it was originally. So this turned out good in my case. Just a tip. If the computer's turning off, it might not be an overheat issue. Make sure you're using the power adapter that comes with the laptop, and it's putting out the right voltage and amperage. And I think volts times what equals watts? Volts times current equals watts. So if you raise the current, or if you have a higher current, your wattage is going to be higher. So just make sure you know that formula when you're messing around with these numbers here. We had a desktop. It was an HP, no, a Dell. It was a Dell. Dell desktop. This customer bought it in. The video would kind of go crazy, he said, as in the middle when he's working on something, and then the computer would turn off or reboot. And that was happening with us too, and we tested it out. This customer watches tons of movies, records tons of movies, and deals with tons of movies on this particular computer, so the video card we were sure was getting a workout. Anyway, the video was going crazy, so we assumed it was the video card that was bad. If you take a look at your video card and you think it could be on the fritz because of a symptom like that, the resolution was changing just at random, then the screen would go black and it would actually start rebooting the system after a certain point. Take a look at your video card. Look at the capacitors on your video card. The caps pop on a video card just as they do on a motherboard when it overheats or it gets a power surge or something goes wrong. In this particular video card, had blown capacitors on it, popped capacitors. We replaced the video card. Everything was fine. Just a note: take a look at your video card capacitors, because the video card has a lot of heat going on too. Right when the video chip gets hot, so. You could have capacitor problems with that, so make sure you always check your video card for capacitors when you suspect the motherboard could be bad or something's overheating in the system. Lastly, everything else that happened today was not very exciting. Actually, I might as well talk about this one last thing. We spent about a day trying to repair a system that may or may not have needed a reinstall. In other words, the system was very corrupt. And we were doing fix after fix after fix, patching the system up as best we could, when finally at the end of the day, we realized that this is just going to keep going in an endless cycle. We're going to just have to do a reinstall. So we ended up doing a reinstall of the operating system. We even attempted a Windows repair, and it didn't work. Point being, you got to know when to do. You got to know when to just say, all right, I got to do a reinstall, no matter how much time you put into the system before then. I'm guilty of it. My dad's guilty of it. You want to fix the system. It's like a challenge. It's like a